Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 22nd, 2021. The FDA authorizes the first antiviral pill in the U.S. to treat COVID-19 at home. It's a prescription drug from Pfizer that Americans can take to reduce the risk of hospitalization and death. This as the U.S. prepares for a huge wave of new infections from the Omicron variant. Washington, D.C. about to require proof of COVID vaccination to enter many public indoor spaces, including restaurants and gyms, joining a number of cities across the country doing the same. Biden administration extending the pause on federal student loan repayments for another 90 days, saying the economy has not recovered enough from the pandemic shock. The new date before payments will be restarted May 1st, 2022. President Biden defending the steps he's taken to ease supply chain problems during the pandemic, meeting with CEOs of transportation companies and saying shelves are not empty. And the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer talking about the virtual meeting Tuesday night with Senate Democrats discussing the way forward on the nearly $2 trillion social spending bill called Build Back Better. This after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who was on the call, pulled his support, depriving them of a yes vote needed to pass the bill. That and more coming up on Washington Today. A story from ABC News: an at-home treatment for COVID-19 that can prevent serious illness was authorized by the Food and Drug Administration on Wednesday, offering a note of optimism for the future of the pandemic in an otherwise uncertain time as the world faces the Omicron variant. When taken early, Pfizer's pill was 89% effective at reducing the risk of severe illness and death from COVID-19, according to the company, and was effective against Omicron. An antiviral pill, by the way, from Merck, also expected soon. More on all of this at today's virtual White House COVID-19 response team briefing with the response coordinator, Jeff Zients.
We got good news today with the authorization of Pfizer's antiviral. Merck's pill, if authorized, along with Pfizer's newly authorized pill, add oral treatment options to our nation's medicine cabinet. As soon as emerging science showed the promise of these antivirals, we acted quickly and aggressively to pre-purchase 10 million treatment courses of Pfizer and 3 million courses of Merck. From Merck, by end of January, we anticipate about 3 million treatment courses available to send to states if FDA authorizes. The Pfizer team has a very promising and now authorized treatment, a pill that dramatically reduces the risk of hospitalizations and death for those at risk. We've purchased 10 million courses, more than anyone else in the world. According to Pfizer, the complex chemistry involved in creating the active ingredient in the pill means production takes about 6 to 8 months. So supply of this product will ramp up over the next several months. Knowing that these pills take time to manufacture, Pfizer continues to increase their production plans. And now that the pill is authorized, we'll have discussions to explore how we can help them improve their manufacturing capacity even further by providing any resources needed. We will have 265,000 treatment courses of Pfizer available in January, with monthly totals of pills ramping up across the year, and all 10 million treatment courses delivered by late summer. As quickly as Pfizer gets the pills manufactured and delivered, we will immediately provide them to states and jurisdictions for distribution. Just as we've done with vaccines and monoclonal antibody treatments, we will ensure equity is at the center of antiviral distribution. We are not only urging states to ensure equity in their own distribution plans, but we are also distributing antivirals directly to community health centers across the country. This will help ensure these life-saving antivirals are available to the most vulnerable communities and hard-hit populations across the country.
Jeff Zients is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator at today's virtual briefing. More from the ABC News article about this new Pfizer pill. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla estimated that 1,200 deaths and 6,000 hospitalizations would be prevented for every 100,000 COVID-19 patients who take the pills. The FDA said the pill, Paxlovid, was authorized for the treatment of mild to moderate coronavirus disease in anyone 12 years and older who weighs at least about 88 pounds. Patients must test positive and be at high risk for progression to severe COVID-19, including hospitalization or death. And Paxlovid will be available by prescription only and should be started as soon as possible, ideally within 5 days of symptom onset, the FDA said. More from today's White House COVID briefing on the state of the pandemic and vaccines, still the number one tool to fight it, from CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky.
The current 7-day daily average of cases is about 149,300 cases per day, an increase of about 25% over the previous week. The 7-day average of hospital admissions is about 7,800 per day, and the 7-day average of deaths are about 1,200 per day, which is an increase of about 3.5% over the prior week. Over the past several weeks, CDC has continued to closely monitor the emergence of the Omicron variant. Currently, over 85 countries have detected Omicron, and on Monday, we released updated data for the United States, which estimates that the Omicron variant represents approximately 73% of COVID-19 cases in the United States. And in some areas of the country, Omicron has increased even further, accounting for an estimated 90% of cases in the Eastern Atlantic states, parts of the Midwest, South, and Northern Pacific states. This rapid increase in the proportion of Omicron circulating around the country is similar to what we've seen around the world. Although this is a reminder of continued threat of COVID-19 variants, this increase in Omicron proportion is what we anticipated and what we have been preparing for. I know there are a lot of questions about the Omicron variant, how to protect yourselves, our loved ones, how to safely gather with our families and friends over the holidays. And you've heard me say before, we know what works against COVID-19, and it's critically important that we implement our proven multi-layer prevention strategies. Let me reiterate those 4 prevention measures for you. Get vaccinated, get boosted, wear a mask in public indoor settings in areas of substantial and high-risk community transmission, and take a test before you gather.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky is director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, part of today's White House COVID-19 response briefing. Some public health experts predicting that daily COVID cases in the U.S., given the Omicron variant's ability to mutate, could hit 1 million per day. But questions remain, of course, about how many of the cases will be serious illness and require hospitalization. Washington, D.C., joining the cities that will require proof of coronavirus vaccination to enter many indoor public spaces, including restaurants, bars, nightclubs, theaters, and gyms. A negative COVID test will not be enough. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser with the announcement today.
We're also very focused on gathering places in our community. So beginning on January 15, 2022, certain establishments will be required to verify that their patrons 12 years old and older have received at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. And so here is the timeline for how we will roll that out. First dose for patrons 12 and older beginning January 15th, second dose by February 15th. Enforcement of the vaccine requirements, therefore, would begin by January 15th. The places that will require a vaccine are restaurants, bars, and nightclubs, indoor cultural and entertainment facilities, indoor exercise and recreational establishments, and indoor event and meeting establishments. People will be able to demonstrate their vaccination status using a CDC-issued vaccination card, an original paper version or digital version, an immunization record printout from their healthcare provider, or a COVID-19 verification app such as VaxYes or Clear. In the coming days, we will be releasing more guidance around these requirements, but we wanted to announce it today so businesses have as much time as possible to prepare. If you are a resident who is not yet vaccinated and you want to continue enjoying these activities, now's the time to get vaccinated.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, Democrat, at today's news conference. Vaccine requirements will not apply in the city to houses of worship, retail establishments, grocery stores, or museums. Biden administration on Wednesday, writes Associated Press, extended a student loan moratorium that has allowed millions of Americans to put off debt payments during the pandemic. Under the action, payments on federal student loans will remain paused through May 1st. Interest rates will remain at 0% during that period, and debt collection efforts will be suspended. Those measures have been in place since early in the pandemic, but were set to expire January 31st. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki explained more during her daily briefing with reporters.
Today, the President announced that his administration is extending the pause on student loan repayments for an additional 90 days through May 1st, 2022. This is an issue both President Biden and Vice President Harris care deeply about. While the jobs recovery is one of the strongest on record, with nearly 6 million jobs added under President Biden, the fewest Americans filing for unemployment in more than 50 years, and overall unemployment down from 6% to 4.2%, we know some student loan borrowers are still coping with the pandemic and need some time before resuming payments. So this pause gives the administration time to manage the ongoing pandemic and further strengthen our economic recovery. In the meantime, the Department of Education, and they also issued a statement that hopefully you will have seen, will continue working with borrowers to support a smooth transition back into repayment and advance economic stability. I would also note for all those who have student loans out there, the President also renewed his call for all student loan borrowers to do their part as well by taking full advantage of the Department of Education's resources, considering income-based repayment plans or public service loan forgiveness, and getting vaccinated or boosted.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. The Trump administration initially suspended the federal student loan payments in March of 2020 and later extended it through January 2021, and President Biden now extending it again twice. According to the Education Department, as cited through the Associated Press, student loan payment pause has helped over 36 million Americans who have total debt of nearly $1.4 trillion. The average monthly payment of those Americans, $400, and about a third are in default or delinquency. President Biden saying his policies are alleviating supply chain issues that have led to some shortages of consumer products, raising prices and contributing to high inflation. President today meeting with his cabinet members involved in this issue, also CEOs of shipping and retail companies.
Earlier this fall, we heard a lot of dire warnings about supply chain problems leading to a crisis around the holidays. So we acted. A lot of recommendations of the people that you see on the screen here. I wish we were all able to do this in person. We brought together business and labor leaders to solve problems. And the much predicted crisis didn't occur. Packages are moving. Gifts are being delivered. Shelves are not empty. Experts in this field look at two statistics for retail inventories, which is how many goods retailers have on hand, and on-shelf availability, which measures how many goods are actually on the shelves there to be purchased. Today, retail inventories are up 3% from last year. Inventories are healthy, and on-shelf availability before the pandemic was about 91%. Today, it's at 90%. 90%. I'm sure you can go and find some shelf where it's empty because a particular sort of gifts are very popular. I don't know. But 90% availability. And delivery times of this season for FedEx, UPS, and the U.S. Postal Service are faster than before the pandemic, even as Americans have purchased a record amount of goods. This is in part due to the progress we've made at our nation's ports, which are now moving historic amounts of goods.
President Biden in the Eisenhower Executive Office building at the start of his meeting on supply chain. Some people in the room, many of them virtually joining in, administration officials and private sector leaders. One of those leaders, FedEx CEO Fred Smith, asked for his company's perspective.
The first weekend of the peak season after Thanksgiving, we moved 100 million packages, and we were able to do that
100 million?
Yes, sir. And we were able to do that because in 2020 21, we had an aggressive expansion program underway, major investments. We added 14.4 million square feet, which is the equivalent of about 300 football fields of sortation capacity, 24 major expansions, and I might add that about half a dozen of those came on just in the nick of time in November to make sure the supply chains were moving. And I think this is also true of UPS, and the Postal Service have done a good job in opening up capacity. The biggest issue that we experienced over the summer was lack of labor for sortation, to a lesser degree on the delivery side. To give you one statistic which will illustrate that point, we processed approximately 52,000 employment applications online, of course, these days in May the 8th, that week. Over the last few weeks, we've exceeded 111,000 applications. So that's beginning to open up the supply chain. And there's still pockets. There's several articles in the business press today in that regard. Just in the last quarter, working around those isolated pockets cost us about $240 million. So getting to your point on inflation, as those begin to smooth out, I think you'll see less pressure on pricing in certain product categories. So the supply chain issues are not all solved, but there's a lot of effort underway to solve them, and we're optimistic that people will have a good peak season, and most of Santa Claus's products will be delivered to the consumers, and the retailers have done a great job of, as you mentioned, stocking their shelves, and many of them are our great customers too. So we're happy to take stuff into stores, into businesses, vaccines into hospitals, and e-commerce packages to people's homes. So we think the peak season is going to be a good one.
I thought you were Santa Claus. You're doing a hell of a job. And you got a big sleigh. Thank you.
FedEx CEO Fred Smith. More on the supply chain now with Alex Daugherty, transportation reporter with Politico. Thank you for being with us. The first line in your article is, empty store shelves may no longer be threatening to ruin Christmas, but President Joe Biden faces a long slog before the nation's supply chains are truly unstuck. What is still to be done?
So a lot of the challenges that have presented themselves over the past 6 months or so are still going to exist into 2022, and the holiday rush, so to speak, doesn't really end that challenge once we get toward January. So we're still going to see a lot of delays with container shipping in particular. The containers that once they get onto the U.S. soil, they need to be transported by truck or rail in most cases, and there's a lot of delays with both of those systems of the supply chain. So even though we're likely to see packages arriving on time for Christmas in most cases, some of these larger challenges are going to persist well into 2022.
And you write about some of the longer-term issues: workers' rights, market competition, logistics, technology. Can you explain more about those?
Yeah, so some of these issues are longstanding issues that existed before any of the challenges of the pandemic. One of those being rapid turnover among truck drivers in particular. That's something the Biden administration is trying to chip away at in the next few months. They're cutting some red tape and some regulatory hurdles for apprenticeship programs to be set up, encouraging trucking companies to hire more veterans and women. But the job it's a tough job, and there's a lot of turnover, and none of these things have really been solved prior to the pandemic. But then when you see, both the shutdown of certain parts of our supply chain as well as a labor shortage and other parts of the supply chain, some of these longer term problems have really been laid bare, since most of our supply chain operates under normal circumstances at its most efficient way possible, which then when there's challenges thrown into that system overnight in the way the pandemic was, that can really, really, screw things up.
And in terms of screwing things up, how closely aligned are problems with the supply chain and high inflation?
So they're interconnected. The inflation concerns are, also more of a long-term, problem for the Biden administration, when the supply chain concerns are kind of are things you can see in terms of, on the ground issues that are popping up. Most notably, what we saw over the fall and continue to see with, lines of container ships lined up, particularly on the West Coast for the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which are the two biggest container ports in the country. So they are aligned, getting more goods into the country and getting more goods out of the country, shipping those exports away. The Biden administration is hopeful that will help tackle some of the inflation challenges, but simply fixing, the container ship problem that we've been seeing over the last 6 months certainly doesn't, account for all of the reasons why we've been seeing inflation.
We're talking with Alex Daugherty, a reporter with Politico. From a big picture standpoint, President Biden came in with the philosophy that big government with the right attitude can accomplish some big things. Is this an issue the government can solve?
So the funny thing is, you hear from Republicans in particular about how Biden has mismanaged the supply chain and he's really messed things up. While certainly there's debates about the effectiveness of what the Biden administration might have done, the reality is our supply chains are not controlled by the government. They are regulated and overseen by some government agencies, but in terms of actually moving goods around, that's private industries that do that. And in a lot of cases prior to the pandemic, these prior industries weren't really communicating with one another in terms of sharing data, sharing information that might be helpful to another piece of the supply chain. And that's what the Biden administration has really tried to do over the last 6 months. They've named a port envoy, former Deputy Transportation Secretary John Bakari, to really facilitate conversations between different industry leaders over the last 6 months. That is something that from the industry side of things, they actually said they really appreciate it. That it's been conversations and sharing of information that didn't happen prior to the pandemic. That's more of like a smaller piece of this larger overall puzzle, but it is one of those things that the Biden administration is trying to do, recognizing that, the Department of Transportation can't simply walk in and start running our supply chain.
Alex Daugherty is a transportation reporter with Politico. Find his work at Politico.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On Wall Street today, the Dow up 261, NASDAQ up 180, S&P up 47. Commerce Department says the U.S. economy grew in the third quarter at a 2.3% rate, a little better than previously thought. And the Health and Human Services Department says a record number of people have enrolled in health insurance coverage through the Affordable Care Act for coverage that starts January 1st. Total of 13.6 million people. Enrollment continues through January 15th. Coverage for those people will start in February. Washington Today continues in a minute.
Download C-SPAN's new mobile app and stay up to date with live video coverage of the day's biggest political events, from live streams of the House and Senate floor and key congressional hearings to White House events and Supreme Court oral arguments. Even our live, interactive morning program, Washington Journal, where we hear your voices every day. C-SPAN Now has you covered. Download the app for free today.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol now asking a second congressman for information. Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, an ardent supporter of former President Donald Trump. They're asking for a voluntary interview. The first person that was asked, Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania, has already said no. Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, Democrat from Pennsylvania, writes NBC News, was carjacked at gunpoint in a park in Philadelphia on Wednesday afternoon. Her spokesman said incident occurring about 2:45 p.m. Eastern at FDR Park in South Philadelphia. Scanlon had been attending a meeting earlier in the afternoon. A statement saying she thanks the Philadelphia Police Department for their swift response and appreciates the efforts of both the Sergeant-at-Arms in D.C. and her local police department for coordinating with Philly PD to ensure her continued safety. And she is reportedly unharmed. National Hockey League confirming that its players are not going to participate in the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics amid some COVID-19 concerns. Instead, use the previously scheduled Olympic break in February to make up postponed games and those that need to be rescheduled. And the U.S. Treasury Department easing some restrictions on some humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan as the country faces a severe economic crisis following the Taliban takeover in August. Now to President Biden's social spending and climate bill. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin joining fellow Senate Democrats for a special virtual caucus meeting Tuesday night. It was just 2 days after he said he could not support the nearly $2 trillion package. Again, some reporting from NBC News. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said in the meeting, according to a Democratic source, "I know we are all frustrated at this outcome. However, we are not giving up on BBB." Stands for Build Back Better, the shorthand. He went on to say, period, we won't stop working on it until we pass a bill. A source familiar with Manchin's thinking said he mostly listened and let everyone say their piece. Manchin spoke in the beginning, largely reiterating his concerns with the bill, the source said. Well, Senator Schumer asked about this today during a joint appearance with New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. It was de Blasio's regular COVID update. Senator Schumer receiving a ceremonial key to the city. We'll have more on that in a moment. But Senator Schumer asked by de Blasio about the Build Back Better bill and also another bill that he plans to bring up in January, a voting rights bill.
Senator, I'm going to ask very broadly because it's on the minds of everyone. Everyone, obviously, it was a tough week. We all felt let down.
Yep.
From certain things that happened in Washington, but I want to make it a positive. I know you enough to say ball game's never over if you're on the playing field. I think it would be great if you just spend a moment updating New Yorkers on how you're going to proceed.
So we had a caucus meeting, Zoom, last night, where just about everyone participated. And there was universal feeling that we are not giving up, that we are continuing the fight on two major fronts, both of which we need very badly. One, of course, is Build Back Better. And Joe Manchin was on the phone, and lots of our members made pleas to him to continue and negotiate, and he agreed to do that. The president said that the other day. BBB is so important to so many people in so many ways, including New York. We will fight until we get it. We will keep fighting. And the second thing we also agreed on is this, what they're trying to do in so many legislatures across the country on voting rights, taking away people's voting rights, redrawing the lines of the legislature in a jaundiced, political, and sometimes bigoted way. And we're going to move on that. That may mean we may have to change the rules because we won't get any support from the other side, but we're doing it. So we had a great discussion last night, and there was virtual unanimity that we should be moving forward on these fronts. And we're going to work hard to come to an agreement to get there.
Well, that is extraordinarily encouraging. And the fact that everyone's talking, but most especially the fact that you are helping everyone, because I've watched with incredible admiration. You have quite a flock there, Senator.
Yes, I do.
And yet you keep a warm and personal connection with each and every one, across the spectrum. And that gives me hope.
Thank you.
That gives me hope.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this great honor. I will treasure it because it symbolizes the place I love so much, New York.
And we love you back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio at de Blasio's COVID briefing. De Blasio giving Schumer a ceremonial key to the city. De Blasio's been doing that a lot lately because he'll be leaving office after 2 terms on January 1st. Other celebrities and notable figures receiving the keys this week: filmmaker Spike Lee and women's rights advocate Gloria Steinem. From the Hill newspaper, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, on Wednesday urged lawmakers and the White House to take a whole-of-government approach to advancing President Biden's agenda. She said in a statement, "Today, the elected leadership of the Congressional Progressive Caucus is calling on the president and all Democrats who believe in the need to build back better for climate, care, immigrants, and those seeking economic dignity and opportunity to come together and deliver for the American people." President Biden saying on Tuesday he thinks he and Senator Manchin will get something done. Today, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked how close they are to that goal.
I'm not trying to be flip with this question, but can you characterize where Build Back Better talks actually are right now? Like, are they back on? What's the process here in the weeks ahead, given some of the optimism we heard from the president last week?
Sure, and I think you heard optimism as well, Phil, from a number of senators who came out of a meeting or discussion of the members of the Democratic caucus last night. And I think what's important to note there is that there is agreement by the vast majority of members that we absolutely need to move forward. And the cost of inaction makes it so that we don't have there's no other option, I should say. I would say at this point, we expect there to be ongoing and continued conversations at a staff level. Certainly the president will be engaged with members and could be over the coming days. And we are looking forward to moving forward in January, as Leader Schumer has announced.
Have there been any more contacts with Senator Manchin or his office since the president spoke to him on Sunday night?
We have been in touch with his team and his office, and I expect we will continue to be in touch with him as well, but I'm not going to outline all those specifics from here.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. Ed Kilgore from New York Magazine writing, as Democrats debate whether they should take off the kid gloves in dealing with Joe Manchin or just surrender and let him shape their key legislative priorities, the very powerful West Virginian looks very different from the other side of the partisan barricades. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who would become majority leader again if Manchin switched parties overnight, clearly now senses an opportunity. Obviously, we would love to have him on our team, McConnell told reporters this week. I think he'd be more comfortable. That was from New York Magazine. Senator McConnell elaborating today on the Hugh Hewitt radio show. Hewitt begins by talking about another party switcher, Senator Jim Jeffords of Vermont, who in 2001 left the Republicans to caucus with the Democrats, and in doing so changed control of the Senate from Republicans to Democrats.
I don't believe he had been publicly abused in the way that left-wing progressives are publicly abusing Joe Manchin, was he? I mean, it was a quiet disagreement with President Bush over, I think, special education funding that was the last straw. But no one abused Jim Jeffords.
No. Everybody on our side was courting him because we were always fearful he'd do exactly what he ended up doing. So, no, I mean, we certainly didn't do anything like the White House did to Joe Manchin. The other day, basically calling him a liar. It was astonishing. Usually when you've got a member who's a little bit out of sync with everybody else, you give him a lot of love. They did exactly the opposite.
Have you spoken with him or written to him about whether or not he might want to cross the aisle like Winston Churchill and Jim Jeffords did?
Well, as I've said the last couple of days, I've had this conversation with him off and on for a couple of years. We come from states that have a lot in common, that have become increasingly red over the last decade or so. And I think what Manchin is discovering is that there just aren't any Democrats left in the Senate that are pro-life and terribly concerned about debt and deficit and inflation. So he feels like a man alone. If he were to join us, he'd be joining a lot of folks who have similar views on a whole range of issues.
Would he get to keep his chairmanship of energy? Energy is a big deal for West Virginia. He's chairman right now. If he switched over, would the gavel stay in his hands?
That's something we talked to him about. Obviously, he, I'm sure, enjoys being a chair of the committee. It's important to West Virginia, and all of those things are things we discuss.
The Senate Minority Leader, for the moment, Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. McConnell also on this program urging the Senate Republican whip, John Thune, from South Dakota, to run for a fourth term in 2022. There are reports that Thune is considering retiring. McConnell today saying, though he's done a great job as whip, it would be a real setback for the country and for our party if he retires. I certainly hope he won't. Thune and Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, the only Republican senators up for re-election next year who have yet to announce if they plan to run. The Pentagon says the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, has spoken with his Russian counterpart as Russia has positioned tens of thousands of troops on Ukraine's eastern border. A readout from the Pentagon saying the phone call is a continuation of communication between both leaders to ensure risk reduction and operational deconfliction. Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirming that Russian and U.S. negotiators will be meeting early next year to discuss Russia's demands that Western nations guarantee the NATO security alliance will not expand to Ukraine, and also the NATO military deployments will be pulled back from Central and Eastern Europe. Lavrov taking questions in an interview with the government-funded news channel RT.
Do you believe that the situation might escalate into an armed conflict, and how will your ministry respond in such a case? Well, our philosophy is well known and has long been established. It is enshrined in the famous song, "Do Russians want war?" We do not want war. President Putin has once again said that we do not want to have any conflicts, and we hope that no one else is interested in any armed escalation. We will ensure our security through the means that we deem necessary. And we can warn any hotheads, and there are such hotheads in Ukraine and in the West. Certain politicians try to fuel the aggressive sentiment in Ukraine. And what they want to achieve is that the more irritants and aggressors we have on our border, then the more hopes they have to create an imbalance in Russia so that Russia would not stand in their way from conquering new geopolitical territories. And President Putin said yesterday at the collegiate meeting at the Ministry of Defense that we have all the capacities in place in order to ensure a proper military and technical response to any kind of provocations that might unfold around us. And I would like to say once again that we would not want to choose the path of confrontation, but actually the choice is up to our partners. And the fact that the U.S. authorities have been quite expeditious with regards to the organizational component of our future contacts, I do believe that it's a positive sign regardless of the substantial work ahead.
The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov through an interpreter. That audio provided by RT, the Russian government-funded news site formerly known as Russia Today. Philip Breedlove is a retired four-star Air Force general who was Supreme Allied Commander Europe from 2013 through 16. He took part in a discussion today about Russia, President Putin, and Ukraine. It was hosted by the Atlantic Council.
We have to remember first, this crisis is completely contrived. It is manufactured by Putin for a purpose. And now what's important is, what is that purpose? What is he trying to get from us? And that has sort of manifested itself over the last couple of days. And we need to keep our eyes on the thought of protecting against the fall of Zelensky and protecting against the United States taking actions that might be inappropriate vis-a-vis Ukraine, vis-a-vis NATO, etc., that we stay on our turf and work with our allies rather than speak for our allies. I think Mr. Putin's made a huge investment, and that brings a need for recouping from that investment. He's going to want to get the demands that he has made, and I believe that he will continue to use this moment that he has manufactured and the power on the ground until he gets those. I do believe he's taking a look, though, at the cost. And finally, I would just say, again, we have to be careful not to reward bad behavior. We need to avoid playing this game with Ukrainian chips or NATO chips. We need to stay in our lane and not sell out our allies and bring along our allies and others and involve them in the things we do. We have to focus on concurrent progress on Minsk and Normandy and get a seat at the table, in my humble opinion. And finally, we need to remember that the rest of the world is watching for the results of this bad behavior.
Retired General Philip Breedlove, who was Supreme Allied Commander Europe from 2013 through 16, now with the Atlantic Council, the chair of the board of directors, a conversation today about Russia and Putin hosted by the Atlantic Council. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying Tuesday the U.S. is working with its European allies to address what he calls Russian aggression with diplomacy, and that President Biden opposes the kind of guarantees that President Putin is seeking. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today, and for more top Washington stories sent directly to you each day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. And coming up Thursday morning, Tony Woodleaf of the State Policy Network will discuss his book, I, Citizen, a blueprint for reclaiming American self-governance. And then the Niskanen Center's Samuel Hammond talks about the child tax credit, which is set to expire at the end of the year. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Thursday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.